Mini episode 688 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by The Unheard Scene, your home for great music interviews of all stripes. Follow them on the web at unheardscene.com.
The FDH Lounge. You want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the FDH Lounge coverage of the history of the Royal Rumble. Rick Morris and Kyle Ross coming back at you. This is part 5D of our Royal Rumble coverage. We're in 2003 to 2007. Split happens. This is 2006, Kyle Ross. One of the worst Royal Rumbles of all time, one of the least fondly remembered, and yet you seem in a very jovial mood here. Somehow
Not really.
or another,
Not
laughing
really.
at something I said.
Yeah, you got me. I'm not laughing. You got me all fired up with a Cincinnati Bengals take. To be
Oh,
honest with you.
okay.
I might have a lot of vitriol in this episode. In an episode that I think we need it. So, yeah, we're going split happens 2003 to 2007, talking about, when WWE was making a conscious effort to have a brand split.
Right.
05, it definitely worked. We talked about that. We liked that show.
Right.
At the end of the show, the mini episode, 5C, I did a little foreshadowing, though, when I said that really throughout the aughts here at the beginning, 2000, 2005, well, maybe one of us has liked the show more than the other. Generally speaking, both of us have liked all of those shows.
We haven't been far off.
Yeah, we've liked all six. Things take a turn for the worse here in 2006. This is not a good show. Now, I don't think it's the worst Rumble ever, but as a show, as a whole, I'd argue this might be the worst show we've talked about, top to bottom.
See, you get to some of those early 90s horror shows, mid-90s, I don't know.
It's funny you bring that up. With that mid-90s period, I know you really killed them more for 94, you hated. That was one you hated more than me, the Rumble itself and the show itself. And that era, it's not good, obviously. It's called the Dark Ages for a reason. But I feel like they didn't know better coming off the Hogan era, what they were supposed to do next.
It was very experimental, yes.
It wasn't necessarily experimental. I just think they didn't know any better.
Well, I just think they were trying to plug guys into an existing template here. Diesel's going to be the next Hulk Hogan. And
it wasn't until Steve Austin came along that they gave up finding a new Hulk Hogan.
Right.
I feel that after two peak periods with Vince at the helm, they should know better than to be able to put on a show this poor like we saw in 06.
That's right.
I just think they didn't know any better in 94, 95. I think, you had the steroid trial. They were distracted. They just didn't know what direction to take the industry. Wrestling just wasn't very cool. I just feel that it's far less acceptable for a show of this quality to happen in 2006 than it was in 94. And just the Rumble's bad. It's one of the worst Rumbles, I think, and we'll talk about it. It's, Rey Mysterio, and there's some stuff that was done in poor taste there. But I just think that compared to 05, when the direction was so clear, the booking was so logical, you watch this and you're like, well, what are they going to do for WrestleMania?
Yeah. There are some things they certainly could have done differently to set up for WrestleMania.
Yeah, and you watch it and you're like, where did a lot of these, you've referred to it, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, as kind of nuke pushes, where all
microwave
pushes.
Right.
You nuke something. You nuke something in the microwave.
That's true, yeah.
Where all of a sudden out of nowhere...
I didn't invent that, but it's a good term.
All of a sudden out of nowhere you just decide, well, we're going to push this guy. Screw how he's been not pushed for the last 6 months or whatever. We're just going to start doing it. And this was just a show where not a lot worked. Even going back to those mid-90s shows, there was stuff where it's like, all right, this is not going to set the world on fire. It's not going to draw a lot of money. But at least in the wrestling framework, it works. Like 93, for instance. I hated that Rumble. I actually think that Rumble's worse than the one we're going to talk about here.
See,
the match itself.
I had a little bit of a soft spot for the 93 one. 3 stars.
That's weird. That just wasn't very interesting. I think it's pretty close. But anyway, the undercard in 93 at least was logically booked.
Right.
And had some stuff going on. The Michaels Jannetty match was kind of good. Brett is a world champion against Razor Ramon was okay.
Even if that felt jarring after watching the 92 show.
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously a huge nosedive.
Right.
In 94, you had the Bret Owens stuff. In 95, you had a good world title match with Bret and Diesel. The Lawrence Taylor angle was obviously not the home run they had hoped for, but it was kind of a big deal when it happened.
Right.
This show is just like, what are you doing?
Right.
What's the vision? And it's funny because WrestleMania 22 was kind of a show that lacked that big WrestleMania match. You know, there was no OMG MOTYC at that show, and I don't think there was a headliner that was going to bring any, lapsed fans back. It winds up being John Cena and Triple H as the closer, which for all intents and purposes is it was a big deal in retrospect because it was the very clear positioning of John Cena as the face of the company.
Although they weren't in that era doing the whole thing of bring such and such off the shelf back for one WrestleMania match. That wasn't.
No,
really
they weren't. They were still trying to use the active roster, although they did bring Mick Foley to wrestle at that show.
Well, that's true. That's true. By the way, side note here, especially when we're talking history, I try to get this in towards the beginning of any of these ones in case any of all y'all are catching these as standalones and want to know more about the rest of the series. Go back to 1A, 1988 if you want to hear setup for talking about the history of the Rumble, just like in general, the structure of the Rumble, how it came to be, what the Rumble would exemplify going through history. We take about 10, 15 minutes at the outset. The rest of these ones, we're just jumping into it with a little bit of the macro picture as we're doing now, getting into the card. But the big setup overall, if you listen to 1A, you'll kind of get a little bit of, assuming that you need more than the macro, and then jumping into the card if you want to hear our overall thoughts on the Rumble and how it came to be, and as I say, the role that it kind of plays here and has come to play in defining the WrestleMania season. And I know that's the prism that a lot of times we use when looking at this show. We talk about WrestleMania a fair amount because this is the beginning of the road to WrestleMania, and for both of these brands, theoretically, we should be seeing some strong signs of direction for WrestleMania, and you look at something like this show, and you're right, it does leave you scratching your head.
Where you're going. And, I think the better Rumbles, they leave you with, I want to see this match. Mm-hmm. I didn't get that at all with this show. There was not a single match afterwards that I was like, I can't wait till they do this. Not a single one. So this is probably going to turn into a bitch fest, first time in a while. I don't think there's been any show that you and I both loathed with the exception of 95. And that was really just the Rumble in 95. I think this is going to be the first time that you and I both strongly dislike a show as a whole.
Here's why it's going to be fun, though. And I'll tell you why. And I've given you this theory previously. And this may or may not have been something that I remembered to say to the little guy when I saw him this past summer at your wedding. That it's a deal where I thought one of the things that really helped make Sunday Night Submission so great when you guys were doing it back in the day is that the product, this was like the nadir of this era.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Really
this was a Sunday Night Submission show. I wonder what I said about that show at the time. Now, I remember it was funny because I remember when Triple H comes out number one in the Rumble, and I had missed it because I was downstairs getting baked. And I ran back up, and so he's like, Triple H is number one. I'm like, really? And then I proceeded to do a post show.
How's this for timing? On your new external hard drive that now has your SNS folder, you have your probably your post-Rumble reaction show. You can probably listen to it.
I'm interested to rectify that with what I'm going to say right now. I think it's going to be similar. I remember not liking this show at the time,
but I felt like the venom that you guys had over the course of that 16 months or so helped make that show even better. Like, if you guys were fans doing that show during, like, say, the Attitude Era, it wouldn't have had as much edge because you guys would have been cheerleaders because we were all cheerleaders.
Fanboys,
like, this is the greatest product ever. So there's something about a bad product that brings out the edge in you, and not edge with a wrestler, but as far as, bitch fests, again, they can be very entertaining. I'm looking forward to getting into this with you, and both of us just being real gnarly as far as our attitudes, because I hate this show.
Okay. Now, I don't really necessarily... I try to be fair with all these shows.
Okay.
I mean, there's stuff I don't like, but I try to be fair, like, what are they doing?
You probably try harder than I do.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, generally, I kind of grade more average than you do, where you're high and low.
Yeah.
But I want to get into why does this show suck so bad? Because it does. You're right. It sucks. And I don't want to be, like, overly critical, because, you know, sometimes that can be stupid. But I really want to say that from 2000 all the way to the end of the aughts, though even the ones we haven't talked about yet, I generally like all the Rumbles. It's just this one didn't do it for me, and why is what I wrote down here at the top of my notes. Why did this show suck so bad? Well, let's go back to the end of 05.
Yeah.
And we talked about this.
We may disagree on why we think this,
okay.
But this just made me sad and mad in a lot of the same ways.
Well, I just think that it was full of things that I didn't want to see, things that weren't executed properly, and just bad decisions.
Right.
Really. But talk about things that weren't executed properly. Summer of 05. You have John Cena and Dave Bautista as the world champions. Spoiler alert, if you listen to the last episode, they both go on to WrestleMania and win their respective brands titles.
That's right.
Dave Bautista, the star of the 2005 Royal Rumble, was clearly, to me, 1A to Cena's 1B coming out of WrestleMania. There's no doubt that what storyline drew the house that day at the Staples Center, WrestleMania 21.
And that feud with Triple H remained red hot through the spring into the summer.
And while Cena had a good blow-off match against Bradshaw, JBL, in an I Quit match. Remember, that was a really good match. That was one of the better SmackDown only pay-per-views. Judgment Day 05. It was May. You know, we kind of were ripping
anything else
on the last
show,
one. We were kind of ripping on brand only pay-per-views. That's not a terrible one.
Was that the one that had Undertaker, Booker T?
No.
Okay.
No, it's the one that Booker T wrestled Kurt Angle, and Kurt Angle was like threatening to like.
Oh Jesus! The bestiality
Yes,
angle.
yeah.
I want to have bestiality with your wife. Oh, you talk about storylines you wouldn't see today, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, that's
one of the most racist things.
Yes.
Ugh.
Well, what's interesting, I have also written down in my notes here, we are not in the PG era yet when it comes to this show. There was a lot of, like, toilety kind of humor that was just cringy and, like, you're like, oh,
That's
God.
what I said before, is that really, until we get to the PG era of 2007/2008, the genesis of it was immediately post-Benoit. We're here to put smiles on people's faces. That's when the whole kinder, gentler WWE started. The filth didn't end with the Attitude Era. The filth went through 07, but as I've said before, the filth of the entertainment era, or the Attitude Era, was funny and entertaining. Around 02, 03, and onwards.
It wasn't all funny, but it was, I mean, there was some funny stuff.
But here's the thing. On the hit and miss percentage was almost completely inverse, up to about 01. 02 through 07, it was like the exact opposite. You had way more misses than hits.
Well, it's funny. There's no Jim Ross on this show.
That's right.
No, that's not the only reason this show sucks.
Well,
it's not a primary reason it sucks. But you had like Mr. Heine. They kind of thought of that. That made me think of it.
Non-PG humor when Vince parodied his colon surgery on live television.
That was hideous. Vince McMahon ought to be ashamed of himself for that.
Should be, but he's not.
But anyway, back to the Cena Batista switch, because I just think no one talks about that. Like Meltzer doesn't really. I actually emailed Meltzer once about it. He never emailed me back. It really pissed me off.
Okay.
Come on, Dave. Shoot me an email. Hit the reply button,
so that's
brah.
why you were so salty about him on SNS.
No, I like Dave Meltzer. I got no issue with him. No, he's very good.
Past lounge guest.
Yes.
I like him.
But no one talks about that switch and how that was kind of the downfall of both. Not the downfall's wrong. That's a bad term by me. Shame on me. But things did not trend upward for either Cena or Batista when that switch was made. Cena went on SmackDown, and throughout his rise and through his winning of the title in the early part of his reign, was generally... I'm going to have to charge my laptop here mid-show.
Okay.
Just throwing that out there.
All right.
He was generally cheered. And, you know, it wasn't necessarily the benefit of post-production. He was just liked. And then you talked about kind of the white meatification of the character. That sort of coincided with the switch to Raw, too.
Right.
But the bottom line is, once he got on Raw, he started getting booed, which hadn't happened before. Batista went to SmackDown, and, like, all of a sudden, he's not working with Triple H anymore.
Working with JBL. Bad
JBL, originally there was a plan to have him work against Muhammad Hassan in Washington, his hometown,
Right.
but then talk about an angle in poor taste happened, and Hassan got pulled off TV.
Right.
But Batista struggled in the early days of when he first went to SmackDown.
Right.
So I don't think that, certainly that move, which was supposed to be this home run move in their minds, did not work initially. And then, to make matters worse, Batista gets hurt here right at the beginning of 06. And they rush Kurt Angle over from Raw and make him the champion. I'll talk more about kind of fantasy booking type stuff later in this, but that was an issue kind of going into this, that they sort of had an emergency with Batista getting hurt.
Yeah.
It precipitated some kind of knee-jerk moves. It precipitated them changing who was going to win the Rumble. They did do one positive thing at the pay-per-view before this, New Year's Revolution. We'll talk about that with Edge.
Right.
And how he really cashed in, quite literally and figuratively. But I watched this show, and the first hour, we should say, should we get into the show as I'm babbling here? Or is there something macro you want to say?
I got a little more macro to go.
Okay.
But as far as it goes, too, because I want to talk about the thing with the world title. And that, yes, they did panic because what they could have done in 1992 and way back at the 2016 Royal Rumble. Just kidding. That's a couple weeks ahead from when we're taping this. But you had a chance to put the world title in there for the Royal Rumble.
That's what I was going to say.
Oh, all right.
Because it was only a 3-week difference here.
Yeah.
And I think that given, and I just watched the show before we're taping this, given that it was like a combination of bad and boring, this show, that to really spruce it up, or whatever the term, spice it up.
Either one, yeah.
The Rumble should have been for the time. That would have been an injection. I don't know how you would have done it if it would have been like 20 SmackDown guys and you give 10 guys from Raw the chance. I'll say that would have made it a big deal if you would have had like Rumble qualifiers of Raw involving the main event guys, not the horrible, heinous Raw qualifiers that actually devalued the Rumble we got. Because I'll go over some of these qualifying matches. That really just made the Rumble kind of seem less important. And by the way, the Rumble, only time ever, takes place in the middle of the show. It didn't always go on last, because I remember in '98 it didn't go on last.
But it was always at least penultimate.
Yes.
And here
it was in the middle. And given particularly the SmackDown title match that we got, there was no real reason that maybe they shouldn't have taken a step back and said, hey, instead of just rushing to a decision, 3 weeks is not that long of a time to be without a champion.
Here's the funny thing, is that it's the way the pendulum swings in the company here with good old crazy Vince McMahon and how he looks at stuff. And we look at the 90s, the mid-90s, how he went back and forth from small guy to big guy, small guy to big guy. Well, also it's a thing here of why one of the reasons that they did the brand split in the first place is we need to have, for each of our touring groups, a world title on there. And it was still the mentality of we can't go 3 weeks without having a world title for our SmackDown group. You fast forward ahead to 2014/2015 when it was okay for Brock Lesnar to disappear for months with the WWE World title because they decided that it didn't matter. So Vince's inconsistencies over time are wild. I think this was an extreme of the one end of we need to have 2 world titles. We can't afford to have one vacant for a good period of time.
Yeah, so the bottom line is, compared to some of the other, well, I shouldn't say that, because when we talked about 03 and 04, they didn't have a lot of, quote, momentum. You know, I'm not a big believer in momentum in football, but maybe in wrestling I am. They didn't have a lot of momentum going into, or even 05, 05 they had the botched Randy Orton turn, but this one, it just seemed like there wasn't any pot of gold at the end of the rainbow here when you watched.
You know, you're right about that, but the thing of it is, you've gone through all these points with the macro and not even gotten to what I think is the defining one. As I said before, a show that makes me both mad and sad.
Oh, yes.
Eddie Guerrero passed away November 13th, 2005, and this felt to me in a lot of ways, and it's so weird because I talked about in 05. that you'll never see anything like this again, at least until they go to a brand split again, which I don't think they will, as far as trying to make 2 stars in 1 year. That's a thing that's not necessarily good or bad. I mean, I don't think it's a good thing to have a brand split in the first place, but it's not bad on the scale of what I'm going to talk about here in terms of the death of Eddie Guerrero. Just like, this was an Eddie death hangover show to me. It felt dark. It just put me in a bad mood. They were talking about it a lot with Eddie. I mean, his untimely death, leaving behind his young family, like, that's not something I wanted to have beaten into my head. They would not do that today. It would be like, and you go back to other things too. I mean, the Benoit thing, for obvious reasons, they didn't talk about that past the first show that they did for him. But the Owen Hart thing, they do one Monday Night Raw, and that's kind of like it. It wasn't like a hangover on the product. This was an Eddie death hangover. Some people will not agree with me. You don't agree with me to the extent as far as how much you think it's in bad taste or whatever. We can agree to disagree on that.
Oh, it's in bad taste.
Well, like how bad it's like. I think it's just like horrific taste. I think it'd be like if they started doing Holocaust humor. But I mean, I think we can agree to disagree about that part. But I mean, moods are like individual things, though, and like it just put me in a sad mood. I was like, I don't want to see this.
Maybe that's what it was. Look, I don't think they beat you over the head that bad with it at this individual show. It got really bad. It got really bad after this. It was
right.
I was actually prepared to be overwhelmed with it, and I shockingly wasn't when I watched it. There were a few times when I was like, oh, guys, let's not go there.
Right.
I do remember this from the SNS days.
Mm-hmm.
I did think at first that the notion that they shouldn't talk about it at all was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and I brought up, I disagree with that Buck Woodward
mm-hmm.
about this stuff, that if you remember when Brett Favre played on Monday Night Football and his dad died, that was like this huge, they kept referencing it the whole game.
You've made that to a comparison,
and the difference between that and what the WWE did here with Eddie Guerrero, it was a matter of taste. Like, it was the way the WWE, they just couldn't, they don't know. I guess I see what they were going for, this inspirational story.
Right.
They just don't know how to do it.
But
so in retrospect, you're like, oh, I wish they just never would have just left that alone.
Here's how I look at it, though. Wrestling's a work. Like, you don't have to talk about it. If
Well,
Brett
the
Favre's dad
issue
dies
is-
a day or so before a game, you can't, as sportscasters, get around it. This is a
But
work.
if Peyton Manning gets caught with HGH as an announcer, you certainly can get
Well,
away with
yeah,
not
exactly.
talking about it, Jim Nance.
Sure, yeah, exactly. Not even touching it. But it's like, when you craft your own narrative, it can be whatever you want it to be. You don't have to sit there for 3 hours and say, hey, guys, Eddie died. Do you remember what happened with that? You don't have to do that.
Yeah, but at the same time, not mentioning it at all is, I don't want to say it's worse than mentioning it all the time, but had they not touched on it, it would have been bad too.
How about like 2 or 3 times during the show, or like if you're setting up an Eddie Guerrero foundation and you're like a spot there and the fans cheer for
I
him.
had zero problem.
You know what I mean, don't make it a cheesy storyline.
I had no problem with the storyline of Ray dedicating the Rumble to Eddie and winning.
I hated it.
I had no problem with that at all.
Well, first of all, too, and
first of all, in their minds, that was the only way, and I'm doing air quotes here, to get Ray to that spot. Like Ray, like I didn't like how they needed. Like, it was so obvious. Like, it was almost like the ghost of Eddie Guerrero was helping Ray
That's
here.
right.
That was hideous. But I had no problem whatsoever with, they showed something in a video package where Ray's like, Eddie was like a brother to me. I'm dedicating this match to him. I have zero problem with that at all. As a matter of fact, they should have done that.
You've said that before, that that Ray might not have been to the main event had it not been for that. And I have no problem with him not making it there. Because, look, if I die prematurely, and what I'm not going to be going, gee, I hope one of my friends can exploit it and really make a lot of money off my death.
I'll probably do a podcast and bring it up a lot.
Well, there you go. I won't be rooting for that to happen, but that's, so it's, I'm not going to bash Ray for going along with it, but neither am I going to say, am I glad it happened for his sake. Ray did what he had to do, but I'm like, Ray was so deserving of getting it.
Okay, well, let's talk about. We'll get back to that. How about that? Do we want to table that?
Yeah,
Let's talk about the first 45 minutes of this show, which is arguably the worst 45 minutes
this side of Heroes of Wrestling
to start any pay-per-view this company's ever done. I think this is the worst opening 45 minutes of any pay-per-view I've ever seen.
Yeah.
By the way, Joey Styles was on instead of Jim Ross here. We should on the Raw side.
And
it starts with
starting innocuously with a Road to WrestleMania video, and then it kind of all goes downhill
by the
from
way,
there.
It was weird. They had like this. What was it, like a Greek mythology theme kind of going on with this
Well, here's
Rumble?
the thing too, and I've said this to you. Like,
why
about
were the
set.
McMahons dressed like these Greek gods when you go to the Rumble 2006 page?
Yeah.
The logo for the show was all the because I remember this was after Linda's very forgotten heel turn where she told Jim Ross, "You're fired." That was
kicked him in the balls. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was the McMahons standing together like in these like Greek god like outfits. What was the
one thing I
behind
told
that?
you? I talked to you about this because I watched this show again before you did, so I told you to be watching for this and everything. I did think it was pretty cool. It's like it's the only time they've ever done it. They had like royal guards at the entrance, and they didn't have a traditional ring entrance. They had doors that these royal guards would open for people to come out.
That was okay. I'll be honest with you.
It's a
that may have
kitschy
been
kind of
that
touch.
may have been the lone highlight of the show.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. I liked that on a show that I absolutely hated.
It did give the show a unique feel.
Yes.
Even if none of the matches did, which is a problem.
I truly remember that. I truly hope that, not hope. I wish that we remembered the show for that, as opposed to the things we remember the show for.
Well, I'll tell you what not a lot of people remember about, and nor should they, was the opening match of this pay-per-view.
Oh, God.
A jobber cruiserweight title match, and it was a open invitational where the champion, who was Kid Cash at this point, I'd forgotten about his tenure with the company, had just said any former cruiserweight champion can come in and we'll have a sudden death match. Now, sudden death matches always suck. That's really lazily booked. So all of the former cruiserweights got involved here. People such as Funaki, former cruiserweight champions Funaki was in this.
Yep.
Who else was in this?
Every spot monkey they ever employed, pretty much.
No, see, here's the thing. Jamie Noble had returned.
Mm-hmm.
Paul London was in this. He was like the one guy who actually kind of got over a little bit, I thought.
Before he got fired for smiling about the Vince death explosion or whatever.
Oh, is that what happened?
Yeah.
Hold on 1 second here. Let me look who I know Gregory Helms was in here and he wins it, but I wanted to go over the other guys because I wanted to focus on Helms for a second. It's terrible that I just watched this and I can't remember. That should speak to how atrocious of an opener this was. Okay. Nunzio is the guy who I forgot.
Okay.
So we can all agree, and then Gregory Helms, who had come over from Raw, because the Cruiserweight title was a SmackDown championship.
Right. Just in case you weren't already thinking of it as the B show.
Yes. But anyway, so we can all agree that everyone involved in this match is better than how they were utilized by the WWE,
of
right?
Of course.
They're all solid performers. But the problem
Some
is...
of them very good.
None of them were great. Well, London, I thought London had a lot of potential. He blew it. He turned to the wacky tobacco, I think, pretty hard. But
what's that thing about glass houses?
yes, that was a good one. You got me back for that. You got me back for that exploiting your death on a podcast, one, huh?
Very rarely do I say something and like, did I go too far with that?
No, that was good. No to do there.
Yeah.
But here's the problem. It had been beaten so much, and everyone said that these guys were jobbers. And the work here wasn't so great to overcome that.
That's
like,
right.
This was not reminiscent of the Cruiserweight division in 1996, 1997 WCW.
Right.
It was just, that's why we call it the jobber weight thing. And to illustrate that point, Gregory Helms, so the big storyline in this match is he had come over, wait a minute, what the heck? What's Gregory Helms doing here? That's a Raw guy. Why is he in here?
More of that hokiness.
Yes. I looked it up because I thought this was the case, and it turned out I was accurate. I can't believe I remembered this. He had just jobbed to Jerry Lawler at New Year's Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Which, jobbing to Jerry Lawler.
Yeah.
Helms. Look, Gregory Helms, post-Hurricane, didn't have a very high ceiling.
Right.
But there's no way he should be jobbing to Jerry Lawler, in my opinion.
Right. In 2005, or 2006,
Yeah,
rather.
2006. So we talk about this brand split. They had this flawed thinking where if a guy was going to leave a brand and go to the other one, they would just job him out. And, the thinking was, well, it's just like the territories.
He's leaving the territory.
But the only problem is it's the same audience, theoretically, and it's your guy.
Hey, they're both on national television, assholes. You know?
Yeah, it's not like when it was, a guy was leaving the AWA,
right,
and he would be going to Mid-South, and you theoretically weren't going to be. Well, first of all, you would bury the guy out because he's not your guy anymore.
Right.
But to have so that reinforced the jobber weight nature. Here's a guy who comes in and wins this match. Gregory Helms with the Shining Wizard, by the way, gets the finish. Who would just job the Jerry Lawler?
Shining Wizard. Doesn't one of the Harris brothers use that as a finisher?
Oh, geez.
Or is that the Grand Wizard?
Yeah, that's the Grand Wizard. So, look, the work here was okay. I think Paul London got over a little bit with the Shooting Star Press, but a title that meant nothing, I think somehow found its way to meaning even less by the fact that you had a guy who had just jobbed to Jerry Lawler coming over. And by the way, that drew no heat.
That takes some doing, guys, to devaluate the Cruiserweight title even more.
Yeah, but,
not till they would put it on, what's his nuts, Hornswoggle. Not till they put it on him would it mean even less.
Oh, Jesus Christ. You had to remind me of that. But, and some people are like, oh, you typical smart mark, what's your straight? Look, it'd be one thing if I was wrong, but I'm not. Like, Gregory Helms came out, and there was supposed to be this big, oh, my God, look, Gregory Helms is here to challenge for. You could have heard a pin drop when that happened. Like, no one cared.
Well,
and no one, and, like, the crowd was kind of polite for some of the spots, but, like, overall, this was just terrible. What a horrible match to open a major pay-per-view with.
And, like, nobody should be bitching at us about our opinions on this because we're not burying these guys in it. Like, these guys should all mean more. But we don't like the misuse of these guys. They will never mean anything being in roles like this.
And by the way, the stink of someone
yeah.
being put into a title match position is something we're going to come back to later in this pay-per-view.
Well, and the other thing, too, is, you know, as we'll talk about with this era, this was, again, another one of their big trough pits here for work rate. These were some of the rare guys in the company who could really work at this point in time, and you're using them in this role.
You know, I don't think these guys were like the elite workers in the
No.
company,
No. I'm not saying any of them would have saved the company, but we could have had at least a much better mid-card if they were treated with respect.
Yeah, I mean, the problem was it had been so pounded in your head because the problem with the whole cruiserweight division is, and this is when it started to go bad in WCW, it wasn't kept as a separate division.
Right.
It's whenever they needed someone to do a job, they would, let's get a cruiserweight and have them job the heavyweight, and it just made the division seem bad. And that's hence, again, the term jobberweight.
We're sticking up for the cruiserweights when we say this, that they deserve better.
They did deserve better. So it's to no fault of any of the individual performers in this match that it wasn't very good and it's forgettable.
Hey, they're better at what they do than the bookers at the time were at what they were doing.
There was a time in WCW where a cruiserweight title match as the opener was great.
Right.
Not in 2006 WWE.
No. And not this format either.
Yes. We had lecherous Vince McMahon throughout a good portion of the first third of this pay-per-view as he was the one monitoring the Rumble draw this year.
Mm-hmm.
He was with Tori, Victoria, and Candice Michelle, and he was, checking out their tattoos. He was really being a creepy old man, just, like, rubbing their legs and groping them. And I think he thought he was cool, but, like, can you imagine if you're those women? You're like, oh, God, I've got to do this. Did they enjoy it?
Well, I'm sure they enjoy their paychecks, you know?
I just thought that was... And then you had Triple H coming in, making balls, and, hey, Tori, can you open up your box? Which I kind of laughed at, to be honest with you.
Well, him and Orton were kind of jaw-jacking playing off the previous year.
They were, yeah. And, again, kind of similar to Rick and Eddie the previous year, you could tell that one got a great draw, one got a terrible draw.
The other thing, too,
turns out Triple H is 1 in this, and Orton's 30. But
in terms of Triple H, though, and a little bit of the kind of humor on his part, whatever, early seeds of kind of reverting back to as he was going to be by mid-year back in DX.
Well, it's funny
you hadn't
because
seen him kind of doing that stuff in a while.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of this show kind of baby faces him, especially in the Rumble. I just want to say this: as much as the 05 backstage stuff worked.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
not this year. I thought the Vince McMahon stuff with the women in the Rumble drawing was terrible.
They're mirror images, basically, of what worked and what didn't.
We do have Ashley versus Mickie James up next, a rare non-title women's match on a pay-per-view. This was part of the Mickey Loves Trish storyline, which we all know where that
went. An entire match doing nothing but setting up the licking the V spot at WrestleMania. That's basically all this was.
I will say this. If there's one positive, I'm going to try to be positive about the show. Between the segment before this and this match, a lot of women I would have boned on this pay-per-view in a 5-minute span. That's all I have positive to say about this.
I don't know that this is a higher spike than any other year for them.
I don't know. I just thought about that.
I'm not generally a fan of a lot of the plasticky kind of diva kind of stuff. I don't know. Like I'm a little more natural than they generally are.
I know John Cena liked them natural. Mickey James. Well, I guess she
I'll
wasn't all natural either.
I'll tell you this. I like some in the present crop a lot better than the ones from that time. I'd take Sasha Banks over any of these ones.
I'd do her.
Yeah.
That's pretty unprofessional.
I still go back to, I think this is one of your SNS shows at the time, Kelly. You're lying about it. I'd hold hands with her walking down the street.
No, just more
I'm not going to lie. I've stolen that a few times.
Yeah, okay, good. I'm married now, and I'll just say I'll do her on a podcast. That's really professional. Anyway, Ashley, this is a terrible one. This is a borderline negative stars match. It was just a continuation of the Trish and Mickey storyline where, Mickey told Trish, I love you, right before the match, and Trish was supposed to be uncomfortable. I thought Joey Styles and Jerry Lawler did a horrible job announcing here. Shame on Joey Styles. I don't know if people were in his ear telling him to do this, but he was putting over Ashley's work. Oh, this Ashley's a real ring technician.
Yep.
She did do La Magistral Cradle. I will give her credit for that. But I would not call Ashley Massaro a ring technician. This was really bad. The finish was kind of botched. It seemed like Trish kind of forgot that it was the end of the match, I think. They tried playing it up with, Trish was conflicted and didn't know she wanted to count 3. It just didn't come across well, and it was awful.
Well, here's the thing, too. I mean, 2006, one of the we're hating on the Rumble, we're hating on the year or whatever. 2006 was really kind of the nadir for things we didn't like of that decade. We've talked about it previously, how one of the big characteristics of the time was, just these awful muscle heads they were hiring off the street. But this was basically sort of peak swimsuit model WWE, of where Laurinaitis is going through the swimsuit catalogs and looking for the models out of there and let's sign them to be wrestlers. That kind of garbage. That's why you're getting the work rate.
I didn't mind Mickey James, actually.
Mickey, no. I mean, she always did her job
John Cena
pretty
didn't
well.
mind Mickey James either.
Yeah, for that period of time.
Yeah, but so you would think after a match that bad that things would get better, right?
You'd be wrong.
You would be. Because we do first have Rey Mysterio drawing his number and saying, you got me this time, Eddie. That was bad. That was bad.
Yep.
That was bad.
Yep.
Obviously in reference to the fact that he drew a poor number. And Vince said something that was probably not needed to be said, too. But then we get JBL and the Boogeyman. A disastrous situation. Right. This is one of the worst pay-per-view matches I can remember in a long time. Again, toilet humor build-up. They were talking about when the Boogeyman threw worms down Jillian's skirt. He bit that mole off her face. Who thought this was entertaining?
Right.
Who thought this was good? Who the hell came up with the Boogeyman?
Right.
The Boogeyman was one of the worst ideas ever, and I'm sure we shit all over it back in 2006.
I think, yeah, exactly. You spent a lot of time on that
and,
back at the time.
I mean, he's wrestle crap, right? The Boogeyman? That's one of the most disastrous gimmicks ever, right?
Right. Yeah.
I'm the Boogeyman. It's, again, you go back to one of those things that if a non-wrestling fan walks in the room, you're not admitting you put that on intentionally. Right. And it's so funny to see how far JBL had fallen in a year. It's kind of like the honky-tonk man with the Intercontinental title almost. That, wow, the fall was hard.
Right.
Post-title for him. And he does what is this? I mean, this match goes 2 minutes.
Right.
With the Boogeyman going over clean.
Right.
Again, back-to-back negative star matches on this show.
Right. But again, this undercard was just completely,
I mean, whose idea? I mean, again, let's go over this.
Right.
Jobberweight title match.
Right.
Ashley versus Mickey James. JBL versus Boogeyman. That's the first 45 minutes of the show that's supposed to be the kickoff of your biggest time of year.
Right.
By this point, I was just I hate this show.
Right.
And maybe that's why they put the Rumble on next, although I think it had more to do with the Undertaker spot they do at the end of the show.
Right.
But, like, how do you recover from a 45 minutes that bad? You can't undo it.
Can't
we
unring that
saw
bell.
it.
Yeah.
And I know it's just supposed to be, whatever. It's not main event stuff. But compare it to, like, Michaels Edge, Undertaker Heidenreich. That stuff was, in the case of Undertaker Heidenreich, passable, I guess. And in the case of Michaels Edge, good.
Right.
I mean, there's no reason that with all these guys that you should have had this shite taking up 45 minutes of a major pay-per-view. You just shouldn't have.
You were 6 months away from being, at least in Vince McMahon's mind, we talk about a brand split. We're going to go from 2s to 3s in another 6 months. You're 6 months away from Vince McMahon thinking, hey, we got enough here on this roster to go to 3 brands. Welcome back, ECW, everybody.
Yeah.
So how do you have that kind of roster, which, again, and we know they didn't have the depth for 3 because I don't think they even had the depth for 2.
No, they didn't. It was funny. The Batista injury really exposed because
Right.
also, again, Eddie dies.
Right.
Batista gets hurt.
Right.
Depth had started to become a problem where it wasn't so much of a problem in the first couple of years of the brand split. It was becoming a huge problem. So let's get to the Rumble. By the way, the Spirit Squad kicks the Rumble off to no reaction.
Yeah.
And
in the first year, by the way, that Howard Finkel is not announcing it, it's Lillian Garcia. So she goes to go into her, start the intro, whatever, and here comes the Spirit
That's
Squad.
interesting. This is the first Lillian one?
Yes.
It's funny because she was dying out there going over the rules.
Yep.
It's funny that this was her first year doing it. And speaking of dying out there, the Spirit Squad. No,
Yep.
Al Snow. Oh, well, you remembered. It's so good. Al Snow, who, again, going back to the SNS days, I had a very public on-air spat with during an interview.
At least you're not bitter about that. You got that going
Al
for
Snow's
you.
a moron. Anyone who thinks Al Snow doesn't know shit about shit. Okay?
I keep saying, I got to get him back on here and reprise that confrontation with you. That would be awesome.
Al Snow is an idiot. And
Well,
the Spirit Squad.
People
Oh, by the
remember
way,
the Red Rooster.
yeah. By the way, when I said, "Oh, it'll kill all these guys and none of them will be anything,"
Well, he would say to you, Dolph Ziggler went on to become the World Heavyweight Champion.
yeah, and I'll say, "What a world heavyweight champion he's become." We don't even remember he was a world heavyweight champion. 1 out of 5 ain't
1 out
bad.
of 5, yeah.
And it took. I mean, is Dolph Ziggler? I mean, how great is he?
I think he's very.
I mean, he's
good.
all right.
I guess he did.
Underutilized. Yeah, I guess he made it out of it. So I guess they
Yeah.
had one guy, but you know what? They never talk about his past in the
Well,
Spirit Squad.
And it wasn't because of the Spirit Squad.
No, it
either.
wasn't.
Plus, what was his name with them? He was under another name.
Yeah, didn't do anything. The Spirit, like you're telling me that Dolph Ziggler wouldn't be exactly where he is today if he had never done the Spirit Squad?
Probably further ahead, but
Yes. So Al Snow, you're stupid. You're a moron who tries to cut promos on Dave Meltzer and shoot interviews and says Hogan Andre was the best match at WrestleMania 3.
Here's the
Can
thing.
you show me that? Pissed me off even more about Al Snow.
My biggest problem with the Spirit Squad, and I understand.
They actually, believe it or not, after I did that interview with Al Snow,
right.
got somewhat entertaining and were just
And
used
that's
to be
the thing.
squashed by DX. But
That's the thing. Like, if the guys in it didn't have quite the potential that they did, ironically, I wouldn't have as big a problem with it. That's a gimmick you should give guys who don't have as high of a ceiling as those guys potentially had. Then again, you need a certain amount of work rate to do the gymnastics, athletics type stuff, so it's a catch-22. But yeah, I hated it more because I saw that it was a waste of those 5 guys. But if in the moments I could divorce myself from that, it was like, damn, they're putting on some pretty good matches.
they wound up doing the best they could with a hideous gimmick.
Right.
A gimmick that has a clearly defined low ceiling. So anyway,
But it's something guaranteed to get the crowd booing you. I'm not going to go Al Snow mode of defending it. I'm not going to defend the gimmick.
it did eventually start drawing the right amount of heat. But
Right.
at first, man, like here, this was one of their first appearances.
That's right.
I remember their very first appearance. It drew no reaction, and it drew very little reaction here. It was X-Pac heat. It wasn't heel. It wasn't the good kind of heel heat they were looking for.
Right.
But again, I thought the Rumble, and you referenced it with being placed in the middle of the pay-per-view,
Yeah.
and then with the Spirit Squad.
Felt mid-card.
It felt like a very mid-card match for the first time. The Rumble had never felt like a mid-card match. So
Right.
it starts out with Triple H and Ray. and they do the old 1 and 2 lasting all the way gimmick. I felt that they'd gone to the well one too many times with this by this point.
They had.
And I think that Triple H, so
Ray came out in Eddie's car, by the way, getting the Eddie chant from the crowd.
I didn't have a huge problem with that.
No, not with that.
Okay.
Compared to the other stuff that would happen.
Here's the thing. So the goal here was to get Ray over, right?
Mm-hmm.
In this Rumble. I thought that by having Triple H out there with him the whole time, it sort of just took away from Ray.
Well, here's the thing, too.
And it didn't work. Now, the crowd did wind up popping big when Ray tossed Triple H.
I know you're not a big fan of when two big stars are out there and somebody else comes in, the two big stars are like, get on my level. But they did that.
I know they
Triple
did.
H and Ray did that with Simon Dean.
Yes, they did. I have that in my notes that
Okay.
I criticized it. I don't like when they do that.
Okay.
Although Simon Dean is worthless. But hey, we remember it, right, Al Snow, you tool. One guy that was tossed the first third of this match, I will say, as much as I thought that the 1 and 2 going the distance thing had sort of happened too many times by this point, the first third of this match is not bad, with the exception of Ric Flair being tossed way too quickly.
Right.
You had some guys, the SmackDown guys, who would come out for Ray, and he would eliminate them. The Raw guys, some of the guys that Triple H had some issues with, one of them Flair, another one Big Show, he would eliminate. Bobby Lashley was given, kind of some limited time to get over, and I think he did.
Michael
before
Cole, in a very
dumped.
racist moment, referring to him as the dark horse of the match.
Yes, I did catch that.
Yeah.
You know who did not get over in this match?
I know who you're going to talk about because he's writing my notes. Go for it.
Tatanka.
I remember the SNS days, how much you hated this. The
Why in
return.
the fuck was Tatanka brought back? I mean, so here's the thing, too.
There were a lot of bad returns in this match, though.
Were there bad returns?
Well,
he was the only one I noted.
Eugene, who had already,
he was a
who had already
return?
been crushed by Triple H.
Oh, he had already. Goldust
I
came
think
back.
Animal had been out for a while. Road Warrior Animal, I think, had been out for a
No,
while.
remember we had talked about the last one. Him and Heidenreich were coming off that highly successful title run in 2005.
I thought he was gone for a while after that. Okay, but anyways.
Maybe
right,
he had been gone
okay,
for like a month or something.
Goldust.
No, I remember Cole Goldust came back, but Cole made a reference. Oh, Road Warrior Animals talked about how much he's accomplished and how this is the last thing
That's
he's
right.
last mountain he's got to climb. But here's what I have next to
RVD was a great return, though.
RVD was a great return. But this thing started dying in the middle and never recovered, this Rumble, which reminds me a little bit of the 93 one where it dies in the middle and never recovers.
Sheldon Benjamin didn't help by coming out with Mama.
I remember old Boat Shoes Belfie loved Mama Benjamin.
Of course he did.
I didn't like it. Never mind. It was dumb. It was not the best use of Shelton Benjamin, clearly. But anyway, Tatanka. Let me talk about Tatanka, which I can't believe I'm talking about in the 2006 Royal Rumble.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, why of all the people you would bring back from that era, you bring back Tatanka, I don't know. It drew no heat. And so
Bastion Booger wasn't sitting by the phone that day?
And, Jerry Lawler's like, oh, I'm sure so many people remember Tatanka. It's like, Tatanka sucked.
Not fondly.
Yes. But anyway, here's the thing.
I remember bad stools that I've had in my life also.
Oh, Jesus. That sounds like a WWE 2006 joke right there. So Tatanka, what's so ridiculous about this is a lot of these returns just get that quick pop and then the guy's gone, right?
Right.
Inexplicably, Tatanka is in this thing for a long time.
Right.
Why?
No idea. Another weird thing is, too, and as much as I referenced that about this era, this compared to other years in the Rumble match, it was a down year for, as I have written down here, the gassed-up muscle men. There weren't as many of them in there. You didn't have, Heidenreich, Reigns, etc.
No, but you had some guys who certainly aren't really remembered as all-timers.
I don't lump Lashley in with them just because he was more successful than
Bobby Lashley was a bad loss for them. Bobby Lashley was not a guy who Bobby Lashley was not a guy that they wanted to get rid of. Bobby Lashley left, so that's different.
Like, I don't lump him in because he was decently successful.
But Sylvan was in it with some. He was doing some fashion gimmick that didn't work.
Right.
Trevor Murdoch, who I always kind of liked Trevor Murdoch, but he was not a. He was not a guy who was going to win here. Chris, you talk about kind of one-year wonders. Chris Masters was in here. He was a guy who they pushed too quickly.
Right.
It was funny because later on he kind of had improved, but by that point he was already ruined.
He was buried on Superstars, but he had so many awesome matches on there.
Awesome, maybe a bit strong.
Well, you're not reading PWO enough if you don't believe that.
Same people who said Kurt Angle's overrated, huh?
Kurt Angle overrated. Chris Masters awesome. Yeah.
It's embarrassing. Okay, so
we love you, PWO.
I think that, again, it was somewhere in the middle of this, but the pacing was good early. It was kind of, they kept the number of guys in the ring down.
Right.
Even if Ric Flair was eliminated too quickly, which he was.
Right.
The key to this, and we've mentioned this in previous Rumble discussions, you never really want to have more than 8 guys in the ring at a time.
I'm a fan of keeping it streamlined. Yeah.
But in the middle of this thing, all of a sudden, no one was being eliminated.
Yep.
The ring started filling up with guys that you really didn't care about, and I don't think the match really recovered at all until it came down to the final 3, Ray, Triple H, and Orton.
Well, by the way, you might want to talk about, as well, for the second year in a row, boy, talk about a guy that didn't want to do clean jobs even in the Rumble. Last year,
Shawn Michaels.
It's Angles Angle comes out and takes out HBK. This year, it's Mr. McMahon and Shane, thus kicking off the WrestleMania feud.
Yes, we should bring that. That was kind of, it's funny. A lot of these Rumbles kind of have notable moments that you remember.
Mm-hmm.
This one really didn't. They
Right.
were going for, again, Shawn getting screwed in the Rumble.
Right.
Where he had already been feuding with Vince McMahon because I think he had told him something to get over it with the Montreal screw job.
Right.
Because remember, this in 06, Brett gets inducted into the Hall of Fame.
That's right.
And, Vince got very mad at him. And, yes, Shane McMahon, they dust him out of mothballs, and he tosses Shawn Michaels when Vince comes on to distract.
I was always a fan of good use of Shane McMahon.
By this point, I didn't
Make
care
it really
anymore.
work a fine garbage match.
I don't know. Yeah, well, who can't? If you can't get over in that environment, then how can you get over? Shane had gone past the 15-minute mark, I thought, by 2006.
I was always a mark. Here come the money.
God damn. See, I thought he was so cool. It's you're kind of old, man. What are you doing? But
it was funny when he was doing it pushing 50.
Yeah. But Michaels, anyway, he lasts kind of towards the end, and they dump the McMahons conspire to dump him, and RVD. So that leaves a final 4 of RVD, Ray, Orton, Triple H. RVD gets tossed, and then the crowd sort of wakes up when Ray throws out Triple H.
Mm-hmm.
And by that point, it's kind of obvious Ray's going to win. He tosses Orton for the win. What do you think about Rey Mysterio Royal Rumble winner? Was this the right choice?
Well, if you're going to tell me that it had to be hat in hand with all the crap they ended up going along with, Eddie's in hell and whatever, then I'd say no. But because
if you didn't do that, but you did a more subtle thing where Eddie dedicating to his, Ray. I keep wanting to say Eddie. Ray dedicating.
I've
to
done
Eddie,
the same thing. Yeah.
Ray dedicating to Eddie. Hey, I'm going to win the Rumble, and hey, now I'm going to go on to WrestleMania. If it would have been more subtle, would you have been in favor of it?
And by subtle, are we saying that that's not going to be a point of contention for the heels to jump in and the heels?
No,
just
it will not be. No, it will not be. It will not be that. No,
that
you will not have.
fine.
You will not have Randy Orton coming on saying,
okay,
Eddie's in hell,
or I'm going to make you let down the spirit of Eddie Guerrero by not winning the title.
No.
Okay, all right. Those circumstances, it's good. I still look at this. I mean, I'm just glancing at my notes here. You've also got a returning RVD. It's a chance to push him to the top.
Well, here's the thing with RVD. They already had in mind what they were going to do with him.
What?
So I would win Money in the Bank and go to the ECW
there's
pay-per-view.
that. Okay.
So with him, I don't fault them. Look, he was in the Final 4. There's a lot of times RVD got the short end of the stick or the short end of the joint, as it might be. This was not one of them.
Hashtag Ironton.
Yes. I look at this and I say, I'm not really they didn't kind of need to shake things up with the Batista injury. I want to go back to your point, though. Would it have been better if they would have just done this for the title and Ray won the title in the Rumble?
Sure. I think so. I think that would have been something pretty good there. Or they could have done the thing where Angle wins it here and maybe Ray subsequently challenges for it. Or, given that the real heat for WrestleMania, and it's so funny, you talk 3 ways with Angle. We've talked about this in past ones here about how he would get inserted into stuff.
Yeah, there's another occasion at WrestleMania.
Orton the real heat was between Orton and Ray. How about Orton wins the Rumble, Ray becomes number one contender, challenges him head up at WrestleMania. There's more heat on that kind of a scenario than there would have been in the three-way, because Angle was sort of like the innocent bystander to an actual WrestleMania feud. He was the other guy in the match who just happened to be the champion. But I'll tell you, though, in looking at this is one of these things where I know you don't agree with me on this, because I think we've talked about this before, and I think this is where you kind of find me to be Nelson nitpicker yet again, but I think it's a plot hole in that Eddie passed away before they could. I assume one way or another they were going full circle with the whole thing with him and Ray. The most heated SmackDown feud of 2005, the blood feud of the year, was Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they're lifelong best friends. And
well, I don't think. I don't know. To me, I don't know. Then all of a sudden you're becoming Fritz von Erich. Then with keeping kayfabe. Oh, I was feuding with him. I mean, I think that would have been in poor taste.
So this is like 2000 WCW, and we should just be like, everything else is fake, but this is real. Is that what you want to do?
If they look, I see where you're going, but this is an instance where I'm willing to look past that.
Okay,
a man died.
I'm not saying it's not a reason to.
I mean, it's like,
But it's like, to me, it's like the frosting on the cake.
I mean, even Rick. I mean, even in '82 or '83 or '80, whatever it was, '84.
Yeah.
They had Ric Flair say nice things about David Van Erich on the World Class show.
What, heels aren't allowed to show some level of class to a guy who died young and tragically? I mean, that's
well. What again? Ray's not as a babyface.
I don't expect that. I wasn't thinking, to be in character, Ric Flair would have come out on world class wrestling, chugging from a bottle of champagne and gloating about it. I don't think anybody was looking for that.
Well, I mean, you're saying that Ray shouldn't have.
I'm just
refer to the fact that Eddie was his friend.
There's for those of us who, and again, I count myself as a past viewer of Guiding Light back when it was good.
Oh, Jesus Christ!
Retconning, retroactive continuity is what we refer to it in the soap opera world here. A little bit of retconning the whole Ray Eddie thing.
I can't remember how they may have glossed. Oh, well, maybe we made, but I don't have a problem with that.
Okay,
I think that was nitpicking.
Right.
I had no. Again, maybe I'm the only guy. Maybe I'm insensitive. I had no problem with when, especially in the the situation. Situation sometimes dictates action.
Yeah,
and the situation here was you needed to elevate a new babyface on the SmackDown side, because Batista was hurt. Ray was the most logical choice. And yes, it was over the top and it got into poor taste, but him dedicating the Rumble to Eddie and winning, I have no problem with it. If it would have been a much more subtle thing, I have no problem with that.
Here's the thing, though. You talk about that, but it's something we gloss over in all of this. And I myself did in mentioning the three-way world title match, but need a new big baby face on SmackDown. Well, in a nod to the fact that it was, they basically had like Kurt Angle denouncing the troops and everything against John Cena. They had him going to the furthest.
Yes, that was bad too. And you know what was bad too?
What?
He was a Raw guy who just came over and won. And they did that with Helms too.
Right.
That's 2 times in a 3-week span. I know obviously the Jobberweight title is much different.
Right.
But they had a Raw guy come over and just win a SmackDown title.
But here's the thing though. Kurt Angle, again, the fans were dying for him to turn face. He did. I think he was off to a definitely effective start as a champion on SmackDown. You're talking about this big baby face void on SmackDown without Eddie there, and the freaking world champion is a fairly hot baby face. I mean, there's a little bit of a disconnect, Kyle Ross.
No, I don't think Kurt Angle was a long-term option there.
You don't think so?
No, because the man was about ready to lose his mind.
Well, it's true. He went.
He was not. Kurt Angle was.
They weren't going to send him into. Vince McMahon was not where he was with him in the spring, like he was late summer. Vince McMahon doesn't let him go into WrestleMania, although he did it in 2003. But he doesn't do it a second time if he thinks Angle's about to go over the edge. Well, I guarantee you.
You have to remember that was not the plan again. Kurt Angle was a Band-Aid.
Right.
All along. So let's talk about the original plan. For WrestleMania 22 was Cena Triple H on the Raw side, which they did. And by the way, we'll bitch about Raw momentarily.
Uh-huh.
And then it was Batista defending against Orton for
That's what I
SmackDown.
thought. Yeah.
So what they did
And
was
they did some jaw-jacking between them at Mania, didn't they, to tease?
Yeah, and I
thing?
mean, they were obviously the former guys in Evolution, and I guess that makes sense. Although, it was funny, Orton lost a couple times to Undertaker, and certainly wasn't being built up as a number one contender.
Beat him at SummerSlam, though.
Yeah, lost to him the month before this show, Hell in the Salvo.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if the original idea was Orton to win this. I don't know.
Probably. Or to win the February, contendership.
Or Triple H was going to win this.
Yeah.
To set up the match with Cena. I don't know what the plan was there. But I don't have a problem with Ray winning here. I think that the follow-up was just very poor.
Right.
Is what it was. I mean, that's the problem. The follow-up was pretty poor, and the Rumble itself is pretty boring.
Well, and then it became a thing where Vince became petrified as soon as Ray won the title. That if he was booked against if he was not dominated by anyone that weighed 3 pounds more than him, that it would expose the business.
Oh yeah, and
so
that was
you
the thing
have
too.
months of him being treated as a javelin.
What made no
else.
sense? What made no sense is they do this. They have him win the Rumble. I think because the crowd did pop. The crowd was pretty fired up for him winning. So you had something there, and then you immediately just squashed it. By having him lose to Orton at the next pay-per-view. And remember how he got back in the title match? Like, Teddy Long felt bad for him. He's like, all right, well, you get to go back in anyway.
Yeah.
They did such a poor job.
They always meant to take it away from him. Which I don't even understand the point of that. Why does he win the Rumble, but it was going to be to take it away from him and have it be Orton versus Angle?
Yeah, that made, again, there was a lot of confusion here. So let's talk about a time where they did stick to a game plan on the Raw side.
To a fault, I think.
Yes. John Cena and Edge. So 2006 actually got off to a fairly interesting start. I remember being really shocked at the time. We did this post-show for this. I remember watching it at the studio.
We did know there was an expiration date on the suitcase and the clock was clicking. Or
the
briefcase.
But you know what, though? It's so funny because the Money in the Bank gimmick has become so overdone now in 2015. Now as we roll to 2016.
It around everywhere, though.
No, what's that?
Edge wasn't carrying it around.
No, he wasn't.
Yeah, element of surprise.
And we had never seen anything like what happened at the end of New Year's Revolution where Edge comes out. He's had this briefcase. He won the first one. And after Cena wins the Elimination Chamber match, is all bloody. Vince, and I thought that helped sell it, too. They don't do it. Now it's just the guy just runs out and demands the referee starts the match. And it kind of comes across as lame. This was better, where Vince came out, said this pay-per-view's not over. A man has decided to cash in his Money in the Bank privilege. Here's Edge. And that was an awesome freaking moment when Edge comes out and just destroys Cena and beats him for the title. Cena had not lost since WrestleMania.
Wait, so you like this moment, but you don't like the ending of WrestleMania 9?
Correct.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm just trolling you with that. Okay. It's kind of the same thing. But
no, not really.
Yes.
Not really. Because you didn't eviscerate, because I'll tell you what, you didn't eviscerate the top babyface in your company.
Yeah, I guess not.
Okay, strict constructionalist, gotcha. I thought you Republicans didn't like gotcha journalism. It's not the same.
Depends on who it's aimed at.
You didn't kill your company dead. The problem with WrestleMania 9 is you killed the active guys.
That's right.
And that Hogan didn't do the job. I would have had less of a problem with that. I would have less of a problem with that had they gone through with the original plan, which was Hogan jobbing to Hart at SummerSlam.
Allegedly the plan. I mean, there are different versions of history out there.
I'm pretty sure that was the plan. That was a passing the torch match at that SummerSlam. I have a WWE magazine where they were doing a tale of the tape, Hogan and Hart.
There's a picture out there that I don't know that anybody's ever been able to find, but Brett said they were doing one with the tug of war with the belt with him and Hogan.
Yeah, I have it. It's in the WWE magazine.
Is it in the magazine?
Tape. Yes, I have it somewhere.
Dude, you could get like $5 billion for that on eBay because I've seen online where people are like, I don't even think this picture exists. Okay,
hopefully my mom didn't throw those magazines out.
I hope not. Yeah, she screwed you if so. But
it's disgusting. But anyway, so that was fine. This, first of all, was a heel character. It made sense in the storyline.
Right.
And it worked to perfection. And Edge, he wins out of nowhere. Right. It was elevating a new guy. It wasn't some old kook way past his prime coming back. It was Edge elevating. And the natural thing was obviously to do a rematch at the Royal Rumble between Edge and Cena. right? Edge now the champion.
With one of the things you and I hate the most at this time of year, Edge with the obligatory, I am not a transitional champion.
Yes, and then they kept referencing that he was after the fact. Well, why we even reference that? That I have that in my notes too. That was so foul and didn't need to be mentioned.
By the way, there's a. I don't know if this is a I think this is a WWE Network miscue. I have in my notes that it's that as opposed to the original pay-per-view. I don't know which, but there was a graphic earlier in the show that described Cena as the champion going into this match, which is I thought that was hilarious.
I missed that.
A botched graphic.
Okay. Well, you know what else they botched? Here's the booking. So Edge.
Cena had a spaceship-like entrance that was not bad, though.
No, that wasn't. That was good. It made him good. And the issue here was Edge had gotten hot. It was a very hot angle they did, how he won the title at New Year's Revolution. And they do the live sex celebration, which did a good number. He had a TLC match against Ric Flair, which did a good number. And 3 weeks later, like total, like that's all Edge run. Like the first week on Raw was the sex celebration, then it was TLC, and then basically you're at the Rumble. So it's a 3-week reign, and you beat him. And that was a mistake. Yeah. I think it's pretty much become universally accepted that he got the Raw deal here because in their minds, well, the plan was all along it's going to be Cena and Triple H.
Right.
Well, to me, and certainly this is with the benefit of hindsight, Cena versus Triple H was not an established program coming out of the show by any means. So you could have carried it on, and I do know, and this is where the brand split kind of hurt them in their minds, well, SmackDown had the next pay-per-view. When are we going to change? When is Cena going to... Well, just do it on frickin' Raw.
Yeah.
Because they wrestled again on Raw, and it was a pretty good match.
The night after the February pay-per-view. This is it, cage match, winner goes to WrestleMania.
It could even be before the February pay-per-view because you ideally like to set the Mania main event up as soon as possible, and usually I'm in favor of them doing that, but
they don't like they didn't like in that era to do anything to take the steam off the next pay-per-view.
You're right, but
there's that. Here's the other thing too. If you weren't doing a 3-way on SmackDown, just do what you did subsequently. Cena, Edge, Triple H. Edge is the champion going into Mania, and it's Cena and Triple H both angling to take it off.
Well, that's what they wound up doing after WrestleMania, if you remember.
Could have sped it up.
Again, it's funny with you talk about how Hogan never did the job to Hart in '93.
Right.
I'm not if Edge had never gotten another chance at the top, I certainly would be a lot more irritated about this than I am now. But with RVD screwing up, he wound up winning the title back in 2006 anyway.
Right.
Working and did a longer program with Cena that was good.
The one thing, though, where,
and then he obviously got a big chance in 2007 on SmackDown. So, I mean, Edge he got a good run. Had he not gotten anything more than those 3 weeks, that would have been terrible.
But see, by popping the ratings like he did, by being as unexpectedly hot as he was, that did sort of ensure that somewhere, some way, even if it's on SmackDown, he's going to be on top again.
Yeah, and I mean, they rehabilitated him with the win over Foley at WrestleMania.
Right.
But I just think that when I watched this at the time, and I watch it in retrospect, it was not the right time to have Cena win the title back 3 weeks later. And the match felt rushed. Like it was a 15-minute match where it was pretty cookie cutter. It was nowhere near the standard the two had later set. This was like a 2-star title match.
In my notes, I just said that it was an average match between them. They did a lot better than this. That year on pay-per-view alone, many other times they did better than this.
By the way, your wrestling fans, there was a sign of the crowd: Edge, the cheating champ; Cena, the real champ.
Sounds like a Cena fan.
There was also, I mocked the use of the term transitional champ for Edge. I am not a transitional champ. Why would you have a guy say that? And then you also had post-match Jim Duggan greeting Lita with a ho. I kind of laughed.
Well, hey, a less painful use of Hacksaw Jim Duggan than many of his other appearances on Raw over the years.
All right, folks. Well, that's the end of the 2006 Royal Rumble. No more matches to talk about, obviously. Edge. Oh, wait.
This is the thing. I gotta say this. I have in my notes here that it reminded me of, how like at MSG on the old shows, I mean the real old shows, they'd throw on like a random tag match at the end. As the main event's in the middle of the show, but technically the main event is Pete Sanchez and the Brooklyn Brawler against whatever.
Well, there was a reason they did that back in the day, is because like with Hogan Harley Race, for instance, I know, like I'm just bringing up a random program, they would go to a non-finish.
Right.
And then they would announce during intermission, that the WWF has ordered a rematch between these two next month when we come back.
Right.
That's why they did that.
And that's where, like, in my notes, what I'm saying is that the crowd being dead at the end, like, the crowd treated it like one of those MSG tag-on matches at the end. The crowd was totally dead for this match.
And by this, we should tell the people what it is. Kurt Angle, Mark Henry.
I was going to let him guess
SmackDown title match.
Okay. Olympian v. Olympian.
Okay, on paper that sounds good. So this is one of those things where you check all the boxes, you fill in the spreadsheet, as you say, and it still didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So I was watching this, and I'm like, they were doing a kind of good job building up Mark Henry here. They did the spot on SmackDown where he powered out of the ankle lock. No one's ever done that.
Right.
But much like the previous year title matches, where I could only take the match so seriously because JBL sucked as champion, or I could only take the match so seriously because Orton sucked as a face. It's Mark Henry. And I know, look, you talk about message board people that confused me. I remember this at the time being told this. People were like, oh, people are really going for this Mark Henry now.
Right.
And the fact is,
it was a good run, but it was not nearly to the level of his Black Vader run of 2011. That was much better.
But here's the issue. You always talk about, they like to pretend this never happened.
Mm-hmm.
They were pretending that the previous 9 years of his career
and
hadn't
that's
happened.
true.
And that I had a very hard time, I remember, during this period, accepting Mark Henry in any sort of serious role. Especially because for years the joke was, I can't wait till 2006 when his contract's up and they're finally done with this.
Right.
And then he winds up re-signing.
Well, it was a matter of timing because in 2006 he was getting the best push he'd gotten in a couple of years, and they wanted to re-sign him. The interesting thing is, if they could have looked 5 years into the future, one of the things that made the 2011 run so magical was the whole Hall of Pain stuff. If it would have been this kind of thing of like, Mark Henry has just snapped and now he's a murdering machine, that would have been more of a thing of a way to do it, as opposed to just like, you should take Mark Henry seriously now, which is all it was.
Yes, that's all it was. You're right. I mean, I have in my notes, after 10 years, you just can't, quote-unquote, rehabilitate Mark Henry. You can't. It takes some time.
Well,
and this was a nuke. This was a microwave push because of the lack of depth, which, again, in the wake of the Batista injury and this being the title match, I can't help but think they wouldn't have been better served just putting the SmackDown title up for grabs in the Rumble.
Well, and the thing of it is, too,
by the way, I was going to say, the only reason this did go on last is so they could do a stupid spot with The Undertaker at the end.
Yeah, where
that wound up meaning nothing.
Apart. Yeah, but it was setting up for Angle v. Undertaker the next month. But here's the weird thing about, and then indirectly for Angle Henry v. Taker at WrestleMania. But in my notes I have here that it was a really strange dynamic because, again, they were doing the force feed of Henry as a monster all at this time just to fatten him up for Undertaker at WrestleMania, and then secondarily over the summer a program with Batista when he comes back because Henry was going to be credited with injuring Batista. So Henry was in his fattening up run. He couldn't afford to look bad here. It was interesting because Angle, as we indicated before, had just turned face, and yet he's now more in the role here of cool heel against him because they're setting it up like, Henry is so dominant, Angle can't beat him straight up. Angle, as the babyface, is using the unprotected chair shots to him. He's taking the turnbuckle padding off. Angle's doing all these heelish things to try to beat Mark Henry because they're trying to force it down our throats. This Mark Henry is so dominant, how can any man beat him one-on-one? Like you said, after a decade
of him looking like a fool on TV.
A mid-carder at best.
Yeah, at best.
At best.
Yeah. I thought this is a terrible closer for a pay-per-view. I mean, you talk about a terrible opener and a terrible closer.
And a terrible middle. So very fitting. I mean, this show was just shite top to bottom.
What did you give the Rumble match?
I gave it 1, and I want to say...
Low.
Well, 1.5 stars. I have it as of right now as my third worst ever. 1995, 1 star. 1994, 1.25 stars. I have this one at 1.5 stars, just behind 91, 1.75 stars.
4 Rumbles already under 2 stars. You are so much more at the polar opposites. I gave this 2.25.
Okay.
Maybe 2. I have to sort it out because when we get to the more modern Rumbles, like the last 5, I know they'll all be in that range, so I'll sort them out a little bit more. But this is like a 2.25 star. It's just going to escape my bottom 5. I know that.
It's in it for right now, and given the crap that lies ahead in the decade, there may be something to dislodge it, but I don't know. I hated this show. It was awful. The thing at the end, The Undertaker comes out with the Druids, and special effects.
And yeah, okay, it established him as Angle's contender for the No Way Out show, but after that, it just kind of like, was it to me, here's the thing. Did you really need to have this match go on last and so you could have a supernatural effect where Undertaker knocks the ring down and Taz goes, holy shit.
Yeah.
To set up that match. Did you really need to do that?
Not really.
Like, I mean, even as flawed as Cena going on our edge was, that would have been a better ending than that.
Well, and here's the interesting thing, because this was not nearly, obviously, as big a match as Cena versus Edge. So to do this crappy ending here, they kind of had to structure it the way that they did. Because, as we said before, it's the first time that the Rumble wasn't at least the penultimate match on the card, but there's no way you could make Cena Edge a total mid-card thing by putting it on before the Rumble. You couldn't do that. It had to be no worse than second to the last. So if you're going to do this special effects hooey,
which I'm saying was dumb. Like, it didn't work. Like,
right.
Did anyone, 2 months later remember this?
Well, do some kind of controversial ending with The Undertaker if you have to. Look at the outright rip-off endings of 1995 or 1994 where the whole roster's running in. You know what I mean? They've done unclean endings in the Royal Rumble before when they only had one title and it was hugely damaging. One title, less pay-per-views. It was really damaging to pull the crap that they did in years like that. This year, what the hell? You got 2 world titles. Who's even going to care? It's on the worst show you've ever done. You know, I totally agree with you. They should have structured it another way. Cena Edge should have closed. Although, here's what's interesting. You and I say Cena Edge should have closed, but you and I say Cena shouldn't have gone over.
No, I would have. The Rumble should close.
Rumble should have closed. Yeah, you're probably right.
I would not have done a supernatural. Again, fantasy booking world, I wouldn't even had a SmackDown title match. I would have had the Rumble be for the SmackDown title.
That's right. There you go.
And then I would have had Edge beat Cena right before that on the Raw side.
Right. But
by the way, you could have made a case that Edge Cena could have gone all the way to WrestleMania. I thought that was a good,
absolutely,
feud. Right? There was a real
political reality is though. What are you going to do with Triple H?
Maybe he works with Ray then, although he probably doesn't want to be the bad guy who is fighting for hell.
Well, who knows? Well, he was friends with Lemmy, but
but who's bigger, Lemmy or God?
Wasn't it that Lemmy
False
thinks
question.
he's God?
Yeah, Lemmy is God. It's from the movie Airheads.
Yeah.
Why do I know that? But no, anyway, I just think that you could have done something with Ray and Triple H coming out of the Rumble, and that was the time. You could have done a lot of things, but we got what we got. We got the last WrestleMania that was ever not held in the stadium. I know
that's
that.
right.
But
probably the last one that ever will be, at least until things drastically change.
And Rey Mysterio's time as a main eventer is rather short.
Well, by the way, too, for one of America's absolutely most historic wrestling cities, going back, decades and decades and decades, quite possibly maybe the last WrestleMania in Chicago. Because I've asked you before, WrestleMania at Soldier Field, you don't think so. You don't think they'd brave the temperatures.
So, it could be cold. It's right there on the water, man.
It is, yeah. So, WrestleMania at Wrigley Field, that would have quite a
it's
vibe
too small.
Yeah,
Wrigley Field's small.
You're right. It's twice the United Center. There'd be no point in that. You're absolutely right.
No, they'll never do
that. Yeah, that's that's a wrap on 06. We hated it, and again,
is this the worst Royal Rumble pay-per-view? Forget about Rumble match. Is this the worst Royal Rumble pay-per-view we've talked about so far?
As I'm looking, I don't know. I really hated 94 and 95 also, but you know what? Yeah,
that had some stuff though that was okay.
Yeah, well, it's but here's the thing. Even 94 and 95, a lot of the stuff that they were doing that allegedly was supposed to mean something still felt mid-card, but Yeah, you know what? Just because, like, here's the thing. Like, 94 and 95, like, I don't like this. 2006, I so actively dislike it, I will say that it's below.
Okay, that's what I think. I think this is the worst Rumble pay-per-view we've talked about so far.
Active dislike. Here's hoping it never gets worse than that again. And as I predicted, we had fun griping about it. Hope you had fun listening to it.
As we bring the show to a close, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, all Clear Channel affiliates, TNT, TBS, USA, UPN, Deadspin.com, YouTube.com, YTMND.com, MySpace.com, various blogs, Fox News, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, IamBoard.com, Billboard.com, Google.com, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPN Classic, NBA TV, NFL Network, Sports Time Ohio, Athlon Magazine, Comedy Central, Cartoon Network, The Boomerang Channel, QVC, BET, The Spice Channel, Steno Notebooks, Manwich, Papermate Office Supplies, Waitresses, Strippers, Bartenders, Garbage Men, Janitors, Microwave Popcorn, the writers of The Office, Scrubs, Entourage, My Name is Earl, Oz, Metalocalypse and the Boondocks, Aquafina, and the periodic table of elements.